Here we are. Okay, with the land acknowledgement. York University recognizes that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Tekaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peacefully share and care for the Great Lakes region. As I reflect on this land acknowledgement, I'm also thinking about how we're all gathered today and reflecting on the role of education in this space and the role it plays in reconciliation and decolonization. I think a lot of our work is also thinking about the content that we contribute to our courses and what does it mean to decolonize that content and make available. So I know that we have another summit that's focused on working with our Indigenous community to really think about what it means to bring community focus. But I would also like us to think about that as we think about infrastructure to support open education. I would now just let us pause a little bit to reflect and invite our provost at York University and Vice President of Academic to offer a few remarks. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for joining us.
Oh. I'm thrilled to join you. My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. Hello, everyone. Bonjour, bonjour. My name is Lisa Phillips, and I do have the privilege of serving as Provost and Vice President Academic, and I am so impressed and grateful that you're all here to talk about this incredibly important, timely topic. I think we're at a moment where this really needs to come to the fore, open educational resources. At York University, we're all about creating positive change. And on multiple levels, open educational resources are going to help us get there. One of our priorities in our university academic plan is around taking students from access to success. We are very much a university that serves an extremely broad demographic of students, over 10,000 international students, over 10,000 first generation students. Accessibility financially and in terms of mode of delivery is incredibly important to our successful delivery of that priority. It's also extremely relevant to our priority around 21st century learning. How many of you might have seen a recent paper that was published by some authors out of MIT on imagining a new affordable educational institution? I recommend it. I don't agree with everything that's in there, but one of the things that really grabbed me was that in order to produce more flexibility for students at a high level of quality and to use their in-person time for active learning, we really need to stop having faculty members put so much energy into lecturing. That the passive, delivery of content has got to be done in a more efficient way that doesn't consume so much of our time and our energies. And so I think open educational resources allow instructors to have components that they can curate into great, flipped classroom tools that allow them to deliver that content in interesting ways to students and save classroom time and their energies for the more active learning components. So I think that there's all sorts of connections into open educational resources for where we are with the future of pedagogy. Finally, York University has made a commitment in our academic plan to the UN Sustainable Development Goals and advancing those and elevating our contributions. And here again, OERs can play a really important role in making a smaller carbon footprint to some of the things that we want to do and allowing us to be creative without necessarily bringing people always to physical locations. So I wish you an extremely productive day and a half. Thank you for all your work, whoever has been part of the organizing team to bring it together. I know it was a bit of a long-term effort, and I will just wish you a very good discussion. And thank you for inviting me to say hi. It's been really a privilege to learn about what you're doing.
Okay, thank you. I'm wondering if we should have a bit of a pause to get some breakfast. Would that be okay with the next session? Yes, I think we should resource ourselves for the next bit. And then I'll introduce the next panel. So maybe we can take the next few minutes. And apologies once again for the lack of infrastructure with our food, but maybe this is why it's important. So thank you. We're able to get some coffee and some food. Not sure if you can hear me. Hi, everyone. We're just getting started again. Hi, everyone. We are getting ready to start our kickoff event. I just want to introduce a little bit how the morning is going to progress. We're using a metaphor. It's called climbing the mountain metaphor. Maybe you've seen the handout in the Google documents if you're online, but also there are some documents just on the table to my left. But the metaphor comes from public advocacy that Michael McNally brought forward with us as a metaphor for the day and a half. And it's really starting with today, thinking about what does it mean to summit the mountain, and then what are the steps to climb and ascend the mountain. So that is the overarching metaphor that we will be using to advance our work in the next day and a half in our discussions. To lead us off, this person needs no introduction, of course, and that is Rajiv. And he will be doing the kickoff to introduce some speakers we have. And his bio is in the package along with all the other bios. So we won't spend a lot of time on doing bios with this working session. And so I'm just going to bring Rajiv up now to introduce the next hour. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I think it's hilarious in talk about not needing an introduction. I'm glad my introduction wasn't. This is the individual who denied us breakfast before we began. That would have been awkward. For those of you who may be familiar with the extraordinary work of Brian Mathers, you're seeing one example of his extraordinary contribution to the public commons. So we've used his remixable visual thinkery tools to use for the title slide over here. And I know part of that is hidden, but it says infrastructure and policy. Thank you. So I want to begin, of course, by thanking a few people, especially Carl, for envisioning this event, making it happen. And I want to particularly thank Joy and Anne and Karen, because it took a lot of care and labor to think about this event, to plan for it, and to bring us all together. And I also want to thank, of course, our lovely hosts at York, Andrea and your colleagues, for, of course, providing this beautiful space so thoughtfully. So thank you for that. And I also appreciate the land acknowledgement that we began with. You know, it's interesting. Some of you know that I work at Brock University as of 99 days ago, in fact. But I still actually live in British Columbia. So, of course, when I think about the languages and the traditions and the of the ancestors who've been on this land since time immemorial, in particular, I would say as an immigrant settler, I reflect deeply on the history of the violence, and not just the historical violence, but the ongoing violence that is perpetrated against Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island, both on the traditional ancestral unceded lands of the Squamish Nation, where I live, and of course the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples where I work in the Niagara area. So some of you know me, and I look across the room. I think I've worked with about half of the people in this room, which is fun. But for those of you who don't know me, I'll reflect on some experiences because we'll be drawing on a lot of this in the panel. So, you know, I do work at Brock University as the Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning. Prior to that, and I'm so happy to see Amanda Gray in the room over here, my colleague from Kwantlen Polytechnic University, where for the previous 15 years, I worked in teaching and learning and open education. But more functionally, you know, like many of you, I've been involved in open textbook creation, in scholarship in open education, in advancing social justice, in advancing open pedagogy in particular over the last decade. And so this morning, what I really want to do and what I've been asked to do is try and prime us, both us in the room and those of us online, to prepare to think about how we're going to approach the next day and a half in terms of this climbing the mountain model, certainly, but to prime us in terms of what we ought to be thinking about in the background, perhaps. And along the way, I'm going to ask you to participate in a bit of a partnered reflective exercise. You'll see some post-it notes on your tables. That's going to come up in a few minutes. I'm going to share a series of maybe troubling questions, perhaps, or just provocations or just tensions that I think we ought to keep in mind as we're thinking about infrastructure and policy, for example. But I'm really going to reserve the majority of our time in our kickoff plenary over here for the fabulous, fabulous, fabulous panel that we have. And so we have Apurva with us, Clint and Dominique. We're hoping to have an interactive conversation. So even though there are a few questions I'm going to pose to them, we really do hope that you will have the opportunity to add your own questions. And of course, you might be, pose some questions yourself by the panelists who might want to push your thinking further as well. So that's a bit of a sense of how this kickoff session is going to go. Joy mentioned this model, and of course, some of you may have seen this, even picked up the handout, and thank you for the gift of this. Certainly when we're talking about, and I'm gonna see if I can follow this a little bit. There we go. There we go. Just gonna bring it all up. In some ways, for those of you who are familiar with instructional design, this kind of reminds me of constructive alignment, right? You think about what your outcomes are intended to be, and you kind of work backwards. You think about how you're going to align your learning activities to get to those outcomes, how you're going to scaffold the skill development necessary to get to that goal. And of course, alongside what we're doing, we also have a sense of, we need to have a sense of not just where we're putting our feet next, what the next step is, but a sense of a compass. How can we ascertain that we're actually heading in the right direction and not just, traveling off into a blizzard somewhat. And so this is somewhat the approach of the next day and a half. And so again, thank you for the gift of that structure, Michael and Anne. And so, I'm not going to get into this in too much detail. They will do that in a little bit. But suffice to say, we're going to have to start by thinking about what this summit looks like. What are we trying to achieve over here? Is it, for example, getting the Canadian federal government to sign on to the UNESCO Declaration about OER, for example? How do we kind of get there, particularly when it comes to infrastructure and policy? So hopefully that gives you a vague sense of the path along the way. But at the same time, I would say, this is not a journey that's been foreclosed. There's a lot of open-ended questions over the next day and a half. And so it is critically important that we shape this journey together, this is only going to happen, of course, if we participate fully and freely. And so I want to talk briefly about you, because you may not know this yet. There's been some conversations, of course, over coffee, but we have not just a wealth of knowledge and experience, but an incredible amount of diversity in the room as well, both virtually and in here in person. Right? We have faculty, we have librarians, of course, the core, the heartbeat of every open education movement. We have educational technologists, we have teaching and learning center staff, we have bookstore staff, we have leaders from student organizations, leaders from provincial organizations, national organizations, we have administrators. I almost feel like this is a hum. But we have experienced practitioners, we have experienced support personnel, and we have very experienced advocates over here. And so what I want you to, of course, first acknowledge and appreciate is when I think about this morning and this event, I look across all of you and I feel an immense amount of gratitude, in part because I know how many people in the room over here are responsible directly or indirectly for the state of open education in Canada. I know we have a long way to go, but we have a lot to be proud of. Right? Some of you have been involved in building open repositories, open publishing programs, hey Inba, OER tenure and promotion policies, ZTC programs, Amanda, loads of work behind the scenes, right? This has not been easy work. And when you go to open education meetings internationally, you'll often get this sense of, oh my God, you're so lucky in Canada to have the advantages you do. And of course we are. And it's hard to sometimes feel that, especially when we have this have and have not situation where BC is incredibly lucky to have the blessing of BC campus and provincial government support that doesn't waffle like it does in other parts of the country. Building infrastructure that doesn't suddenly get abandoned, building organizations that suddenly don't get defunded, for example. But notwithstanding all of that, I think we have to, and that's a funny phrase to use, notwithstanding the absence of support when it can suddenly be withdrawn, I do think we have a lot to be grateful for. And so, again, thank you for the opportunity to come together, to think about this more intentionally, and to build on the work that's taken place asynchronously. I want to start by engaging, as I said, in this slight reflective exercise. And some of you who are familiar with the with a set of facilitation techniques known as liberating structures may be vaguely familiar with what I'm about to do, but it's an adapted version of it. Because I thought before we think about the summit and where we want to go, it actually helps us to know where we're coming from, and in particular, why we do what we do, not just what we do. And so, Clint, I'm going to ask you for your help with this. So I'll just model what I'm trying to do over here. But when we begin, I'm going to ask you to pair up with somebody at your table. And this is what you're going to do with each other in turn. So I'm just going to start by picking something that I do. Let's say right now it's building institutional systems to support open education. And I want you to ask me why. And I should say this is fun because I haven't prepared this. So I'm trying to do this on the fly, so it's a little more authentic. You know, I think about the work that we've done, Amanda, as well together. I think part of it is we want to make it so that faculty are not just aware of the range of options, not just aware of the constraints that students are working within, but those who want to do the right thing are not swimming upstream. I think that's part of it.
Why is it important that they feel like they're not swimming upstream?
Second line. Well, I think even when it comes to accessibility, one of the things I see a lot is it's often left to the empathy of individual educators to do the right thing when inclusive design should be the default. So for me, I think I want to make it so that the system is not forcing it into an individual exception to be micro.
Why do you feel it's important for it to be systematic and not individual?
He's going to keep going until he thinks he's gotten to the core of my why.
We'll get a little uncomfortable at times, yeah.
Yeah, so it might take, typically up to, it's going to be 7, 8, 9 whys. But why? Well, because the system, if you look at it now, is not engineered to be equitable. It's not lip service, and Lord knows higher ed has performative allyship spectacularly well. But it replicates and reinforces societal power hierarchies. So if we are to live up to the true potential, the system has to be re-engineered.
And that really is at the heart.
Getting close, yeah. So hopefully that gives you a sense of what we're trying to do, but it's very personal, very individual. People have different life stories, right? Some of you may have also faced food insecurity. Some of you may have also been a first-gen students, have had that experience of being a precarious contingent faculty member trying to teach precarious students themselves struggling with these conditions. So I would say draw on that, because one of the biggest gifts I was given years ago was from a colleague of mine. Thank you, Glenn. His name is Regan Gurung, and he works at Oregon State now. And he gave a talk in which he said, and it's funny, he was talking about superheroes at the time, Batman, actually. But his point was, if you understand what your origin story is, you understand where your power lies. And so he was trying to think about my origin story as an educator. That's why I want to understand, why am I so passionate about this particular work? Why? Like, why will I push even if it's in the face of lots of opposition? I know my why. And so this is part of the exercise. So pair up, ask each other these series of questions until you think you've gotten close enough to the why. And once you have that why, take one of those post-it notes, write it down without your name, and then you wouldn't mind sticking it up on that whiteboard on the front. That, I think, is something we're going to draw on over the next day and a half. Is having that clarity of purpose about our why is going to be a source of strength for us. It should take about 5 minutes or so, but please.
The link to the Zoom message. Yeah.
And for those of you who are hearing us online, we're just about to come back. Brilliant. Well, thank you, everyone. This was really, really beautiful. And we will have a chance to look at this later. You can add to this later. This wasn't, one of those speak now or forever hold your peace moments. So please do, if you have emerging thoughts, add to them. We will record these, distill these, but I can already see some beautiful common themes emerging. When you get to the core of what drives you in this work, it's often about things like empowerment, agency, access, equity, community. Thank you, Clay. Yeah, exactly. So I appreciate that, and hopefully that grounds you in terms of where you're coming from, or at least what's at the core of your belly when you're having these difficult conversations and fights. But for now, I want to switch to just sharing a few quick tensions, provocations that I thought might be handy to kind of keep in mind. First, I wanted us to maybe keep in mind, and particularly maybe this week, last week, with everything that's happening with Twitter and Mastodon and the communities that are emerging therein, I thought it'd be useful to keep in mind centralized and federated models, particularly when it comes to sustainability and infrastructure. The importance of supporting local communities on the one hand, but allowing for interoperability, perhaps through common standards, for example, right? The importance of ensuring, perhaps most importantly, that open education work cannot be held hostage, cannot be enclosed, cannot be abandoned in the face of shifting government priorities. So that was one thing. I thought, let's keep that in mind. Second, some of you know this as the reusability paradox, right? But the more localized a particular open educational resource is, of course, the more effective it is in terms of being relatable to learners, more customized, more adapted. But of course, the more localized an OER is, the less universally reusable it is at the same time. Now, of course, these are not mutually exclusive goals. And so one of the things I thought we should think about is how to enable and perhaps maximize both localization and reusability when it comes to open education. Again, drawing on the lessons of the last decade or so. Third, and again, these is just my observations from the work I've done, is I think we should think about both the standards that we want to hold to, not just aim for, but absolutely stick to, but also think about the thresholds for participation. Because whether it's in terms of open license or quality or anything else, how low of a barrier or how high of a barrier we wish to erect for participation when it comes to community, right? I think we should reflect on lessons from pitfalls when it comes to embedding purity tests, shall we say, into our work, but at the same time scaffolding the necessary skill development that we need if we want to get everybody to a common high standard. Another challenge I think we often face. Fourth, I really do think we need to think about our biases, and not just in terms of what you might be imagining, but implicit biases, absolutely, right? And the territorial acknowledgement at the start again should remind us of what the academy considers to be legitimate epistemologies that have been admitted. Indigenous ways of knowing and being are not often regarded as admissible within the academy. So absolutely, in terms of our epistemic biases, but also in terms of our cognitive biases. Right? And when I think about all of the work around building infrastructure to develop and support educators to create who we are, I think about things like functional fixedness. And I say this because I'm a psychologist, but we often approach new questions, new challenges, new opportunities with the baggage or with the constraints, with the blinkers of our past experiences. And so, for example, as we invent this new future, is it appropriate for us to be limiting our thinking, for example, to models of resource creation that come from, let's say, the traditional textbook industry, where there are so many more affordances when it comes to openness, collaboration, temporal collaboration, branching, that just are not a feature of traditional models. So I think part of it is breaking outside of our own models of what is comfortable, what are we used to, and what are we assuming that we shouldn't assume when it comes to openness. Finally, I really do think we should not
be shy at all about centering this discussion, centering this work on social justice.
This is not an accidental additional bonus.
This is the core, something that worked a lot for us.
And so,
if you draw on the work of scholars in this space, including Sarah Lambert, Cheryl Hodgkinson Williams, and others, then we should think about redistributive justice, of course, which is what many open education efforts focus on, reallocating resources to those who, by circumstance, have less, but also recognitive justice, thinking about
social and
cultural diversity in the
text itself, and further to representational justice in terms of shared power, co-created knowledge, and making sure that minoritized individuals are able to co-create knowledge about themselves. And of course, all of that flows back to epistemic justice as well. So again, these are just some ideas that I had in mind as I was thinking about the summit, drawing on my work in the space. But as I said, I want to get out of the way as quickly as I can, which is now, and take the opportunity to invite fabulous panelists up. So Apurva, Dominique, Clint, please join us to the front over here. And we're going to kick off. Yeah. And I'll stay here for the first thing, because I still need to tweak the slides. I'll move there after the second. Oh yeah, you can move it, and that's great. That's fantastic.
So we have you. Oh yes. You go back and work. So I think I'm like, are you? I'm working with folks on my personally. Yeah, I can start this in the keyboard. Yeah.
Hopefully this mic is also connected to online.
Oh, never mind. So this is also backup.
Can everyone hear? Oh yeah.
Fantastic. So I mean, as you can see, this panel was assembled with like a lot of care, and that's a lot of work that we're preparing. So I want to thank again all for joining us. Again, we hope for this to be an interactive session, but we're going to begin just with a simple, straightforward question with us. Each of our panelists, starting with Apurva, to begin by sharing their story in a way that demonstrates or exemplifies their perspective or their lived experience in this space in open education.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. If you can't hear me, let me know. I can project louder. I am the Assistant Director and Director of Open Education at the Rebus Foundation. It's a charity based in Montreal, working to really make knowledge freely available. I actually have a lot of experience studying as an international student in Quebec. I went to McGill, as this bottle says. But I also studied in British Columbia at Simon Fraser University, and I've been living in Toronto now for about 3 years and have had the privilege of working with folks at Campus Manitoba, in Campus Ontario, University of Saskatchewan. So I have a good sense of what the post-secondary ecosystem is like in Canada. I also just wanted to ground my conversation today in some values that I use in my work at Rebus. This involves collaboration, community, equity, care, and respect. I know Rajiv mentioned empathy earlier. I think that's also central to how I do my work in Open, with the goal really of promoting what we call a supportive culture, an education system that centers the student experience and centers learning and student success, not just in terms of grades, but in terms of individual success. My experience is primarily in publishing, but in the recent years, I have worked at the grassroots level with individual educators and faculty members and librarians at a number of 2-year and 4-year colleges and universities. But I've also had the opportunity to work with many individuals at the state systems, boards of education, education compacts, primarily in the US, as well as let's see here, smaller individual sort of scholars and researchers with their open publishing efforts and open publishing programs. So I'm really hoping to bring a lot of the learning from what I've seen in US models, where some of these efforts are federally funded, back to our conversation here to think of how can we get the Canadian government to think about creating similar communities of practice or collaborative networks that span all of these stakeholders, whether it's students, librarians, instructional designers, administrators, or more. And really what I'm hoping to do is to get us to think about not just OER and OER infrastructure, but also open pedagogy and student success, as the provost was saying earlier this morning, and how we can build it into the fabric of the higher ed system. So OER is not just an alternative to these models, but the vision really is to feed this into what we're doing. I'll pass it on to you, Rajiv.
So following Purva, if I was to describe myself, and you'll figure out from my accent that I was not born in Canada, is I have always been torn between different cultures and languages. I'm from Europe, and at the moment Europe, and particularly my Earth being reimagined by the different countries where France had some, I would say, connections with, which is Africa or Asia and Canada. So I have always been in between. So when you are an in-between, even when I arrived in Toronto, I was not French-Canadian, but I am French-Canadian, but I am not French-Canadian the way you are being described if you were born in Canada. So you have to find a sense of place. Where do you belong? And how are you going to support people who are actually experiencing the same thing? So I'm glad you actually chose the mountain imagery. I come from the mountains, I come from the Alps, and I totally agree that what is important is to trust who you're going to be climbing the mountain with. And this is what I have been able and figured out as my lesson. I need to trust who I'm going to be with in whatever space, programming space I have, otherwise I can't be. So that sense of openness, I would say, guided me to support the same space as me. And it doesn't matter if they come from Europe. So I would say that why I've been attracted, and all the projects I'm going to describe, which is the Globally Network Learning at York or Camaris, starts with that notion of opening and openness and feeling that openness and making other people feel that openness. So how do we do it? It's not easy because we are a culture where we have always been trained in thinking in terms of silos. I just started my talk with that. Iranian-Canadian, but what does it mean? When I go back to Iran, they don't know what it means. So how do you define and support these people? And the work that we have done in launching Globally Network Learning is to support, as Rakesh was saying this morning, these educators and students who are maybe swimming upstream, but somehow know that it is important to move in that direction to better and deeply understand what inclusiveness and equity means. You have to feel it. So I'm glad that actually 2 years ago, I moved to Brantford, a very distressed town in Ontario, but where I am actually living with 6 nations. And it has changed my perspective as well, because now I see them in the store. It's not an abstract, totally abstract concept. I shop with them. They are in school, and I can support as well how they're going to be reflected in the school curriculum. And this is the Camaris project. So Camaris is a repository and at the same time a portal to support bilingualism and plurilingualism because there is at the moment a decrease in that notion of bilingualism and adopting a support for bilingualism and plurilingualism in Canada for X reason, and I'm not going to actually go there. But the result is that Canada, which is seen in the world as one of the most open countries, if you lose that plurilingualism and that bilingualism aspect, will just be like another country. So CAMRIS is to support, of course, the educators and all the stakeholders in what we call French as langue d'apprentissage. So we don't call it anymore the second language, but the language that you learn in school, because it's not your mother tongue, it could be your third and fourth. And to support it, what I have learned is that I am facing years of educators being trained in, as our provost was saying, lecturing and not providing the students the tools and the documents to actually think for themselves. At the same time, at the post-secondary level, and moving from K-12 now to post-secondary level, what we are seeing is that, and that's from a personal experience, as I was sharing with my group, graduate students at the doctoral and master level are so much craving to actually not accept any documents, any publications, any training as truth. And this is the first time I am actually living this. They are like poking, and they have the tools to do it because we train them very well with methodologies to actually poke at concepts, that they are disturbing me. And what I realize is that I don't have the tools to actually guide them, even finish their master or finish a doctoral thesis, because I am alone in front of that question of decolonialism or indigenous. And they are all going for those subjects this year. I have 10 in my seminar. They all chose a subject like that and not taking any existing documents, scientific publications, or any documents as truth. So they say, how do I question that? What are the methodology that allow me to see the implicit or to debunk even what science has said? Starting from the 17th century, like they go back, they have a tool, they have an internet. Thanks to the librarian, they know how to find documents. I'm telling you, I'm noticing, but I am not equipped. So I find that what open education and open education resources can do, and when I put in resources, is the not only pedagogical resources, but knowledge product, which is open science, and bridging, again, putting under open science, open data management, open publication, and open education might allow us to support the next generation. So those two projects that I am guiding are giving me lots of grief because I actually realize that I am not able to guide anybody by myself. So I will never go to a TED Talk because I think that that would be a fraud. I know nothing in front of the new generation. And therefore, I find that open education and the collaborative work can only help us imagine those new infrastructures and policies. And that's why I advocate for bridging, open access, open data management, and open education, like Finland has done and Norway at the national level. When they talk about open science, they put those three, and they develop policies and infrastructure. And I'll finish by saying I was so impressed by one repository, which is called an arena in the Norwegian, where I know it's a national level. It's difficult in Canada because education is provincial, but this is the group capable of doing this. 5,000 students connect on a daily basis to an open data and open document repository to learn. 5,000, no textbook. And who actually created those documents for teaching is the group. So they have actually developed a sustainable organization model so that the repository is actually built by collaboratively and co-designed by all of the important people who actually are swimming.
Hi, everyone. My name is Clint Lalonde, and I'm the acting director of open education for an organization called BC Campus. Some of you may be familiar with the work that we do in British Columbia. We are funded by the Ministry of Advanced Education, Skills and Training, as well as the Hewlett Foundation, and have worked in open education for since the very early days of open education, going all the way back to MIT OpenCourseWare days in 2003, 2004. Since 2012, we have stewarded an open textbook project, which is a massive project in British Columbia, and has saved students around $30 million in textbook costs. Since that time, it continues today. We have a repository of 400 open textbooks. That's the biggest project that we kind of steward in the open space. However, we do many other projects in the open space as well. We support the ZTC programs. We have a research arm too, where we support researchers that are doing research on open education. So very quickly, I just want to bring two perspectives today. And one is that I'm a strong advocate for students, as I know we all are, which is why I wanted to have this slide here. Because Berkeley has become something of a North Star for us, an example of the implications of high textbook costs. And I know open educational resources are more than just textbooks and more than just costs. However, when we talk about advocating with institutions and organizations that have funding, this message does resonate and it helps students. So this is like, to me, the win that we have when we talk to financial organizations. High textbook costs are just a piece of this, but when students come out of colleges and universities with $25,000 in student debt, it causes them to delay major life decisions, things like getting married, having children, buying a house, which is difficult enough. But when you're already saddled with 25 grand or 30 grand in student debt, that becomes an almost unreachable task. So, so I come wearing this hat as a student advocate, and I know that we all are student advocates here, but I just wanted to keep people like Brittany front and center in our conversations when we talk about why we advocate for the things that we advocate for. The second hat that I wear is as a technologist. And so I know infrastructure, when we talk infrastructure, can mean more things than just technology, but I come with it from a technologist background and with a technologist lens, understanding that if we don't have the infrastructure in place, building these kinds of scalable solutions that we want to have and to have the kinds of impact that we want to have is very, very difficult. So there is a foundation of technology that we need to pay attention to and be very explicit about technologies that match with our values as open educators. And I'll talk about that in just a few moments here. But specifically with BC Campus, we maintain 2 instances of Pressbooks. So we provide publishing platforms for higher education institutions within the province. Any educator in British Columbia can use our Pressbooks instance to self-publish. We have 2 because we do fund open textbooks. And so we have one set aside just for projects that we fund, and then another one that's open for educators. We also maintain repositories of the content. And we have a 1st generation repository, which if any of you are familiar with is open.bccampus.ca. We have recently launched a new version of that repository, and we have built in some technologies that we think will make it more interoperable with other open education initiatives. So we have technical standards like LRMI metadata built into there so that it can be findable. And so we've made a very intentional design decision to try to make our technologies interoperable with technologies that are out there. And we've also worked quite a bit with open homework systems. So we support technologies like H5P and WebWork, which are open source technologies, to try to address the pivot that we're seeing a lot of publishers making away from textbooks as resources to platforms as resources. So the costs are now being borne by students, not at a textbook level, but to access these platforms to do their homework. And what are the implications around that? And are there other choices out there that are open that we can use and provide to students that are give them the same level of service at no cost to the students? So those are the 2 sort of perspectives that I use.
So I'm gonna continue by posing one question to each of our panelists, and but feel free for the rest of you to jump in as well if you have additional thoughts. But I'd like to begin with you. Based on your experience, I'd love to understand why infrastructure in particular is important.
Sure, yeah. I thought maybe start this off, we should explain what open technologies are to kind of our conversation, or what I think open technologies are. And I think open technologies are really technologies that are really aligned with the values that we have in the open education community and allow us to do the things that we want to do that don't force us to compromise our values. And so more succinctly, technologies that are born out of the open source software movements and the free software. There's a lot of similarities in the DNA between open educational resources and open source technologies. And in fact, if you look back to the free software was developed with 4 fundamental freedoms baked into it. And I'm just going to read these here. The freedom to run the program for any purpose, the freedom to study how the program works and change how it does so the computing can happen as the user wishes, the freedom to redistribute copies so users can help others, and the freedom to distribute copies of modified versions to others. So those are the 4 sort of fundamental principles of the free software movement. And you can hear in those the 5 R's, of what we do in open educational resources. There's the history between open educational resources and open software is long. And so when I talk about open technologies, I'm talking about those kinds of technologies. Some colleagues of mine, Brian Lamb and Tanis Morgan, have done some work around this, and they have some questions like, when we choose technologies, how do we know that they are open technologies? And so they've posted a series of questions to think about when you're thinking about open technologies. Things like, is there a financial cost? Who bears that financial cost? Is it the students, the teachers, the institutions, or perhaps there's business models that are built in around the collection and sale of personal information and data, which is more common these days. Are there limits to how people can participate? Are there functions that can only be used by instructors, say, and not by students? And so when we talk about things like open pedagogy and enabling open pedagogy, we want to ensure that we have open platforms that allow us to do the kinds of pedagogical innovation around open pedagogy. Can resources that are produced by it be shared legally and easily? Can others find, access, and reuse the materials and activities? Does the technology require something else, like a plugin or something that's proprietary, or even a password that prevents people from accessing it or using it? Can the resources that are built with the technology be revised, rebuilt, customized, or remixed with other resources without needing expensive tools? And they're an open purist who probably say are free tools, right? Open technologies kind of exist on a spectrum. Like some people will think that Google is open because it's free to use, right? And so for them, that is an open technology, when in reality, we know that when we use free platforms that we don't pay for, we become the product of those platforms, right? And so is it really open if what we give up is some of our own personal information, or asking our students even worse to give up some of their own? Does the technology support open standards and open formats, making it easy to move the work to other open tools or integrate with other open technologies? And does the provider of the technology track user activity with intention of monetizing it, or privacy policies? Are they transparent, or are they trustworthy? These are the kinds of questions that we ask when we look at technologies. And now open technologies can't solve all of these, or not the be all and end all, but history suggests that it does reduce it. And open technologies do come from a place that are very much in line with our values as open educators. So when we talk about why they're important, I think that they are important, particularly that reason, because they align with our values, because they allow us some more freedoms and opportunities to do the things that we want to do. We have control over the technology. We can ensure that they enable the kinds of open activities that we want to have happen. We have some resilience with these open technologies. When we own them and we host them, we're not worried about a company going out of business, which happens quite often, especially in an era when we are we're seeing a lot of technologies that are funded by venture capitalists that will often be funded for a year or 2 years. They make a big impact, they get some traction in education, and then they're sold. And before they go out of business. And they often, what gets sold with those technology companies is all the data that they collect. So those are some of the reasons why I think open technologies are important.
Of course, you know, I'm cognizant also of timing, where we started a bit late as well. So I do want to, you know, if there's something important that I either approve or reject, before we move to that question, the question of open infrastructure. So, well then, this one's for you then, this in your introductory comments as well, but you know, I'm interested in from your perspective, what are the biggest lessons that we can draw on from other jurisdictions or groups, and that might be, you know, pitfalls to avoid, or also strategies or tactics that we ought to consider about?
A great question, and I actually read this quote on the subway this morning that I thought is worth sharing. It's a question from Kent McGuire, who's the program director at the Hewlett Foundation working on their education programs. He asked us to think about how we can build reform based on the assets of our education system rather than responding only to problems. And I wanted to bring that up because I think the danger sometimes that I've seen with open infrastructure and when we're thinking about open technologies that Clint was describing was replicating the wheel. Because it had a lot of experience actually trying to create a software for OER project management. And in the 4 years that we spent doing that work, we learned very quickly that educators are stuck with their tools of choice and their workflows of choice, and getting them to really change their behaviors and adapt new systems and new technologies can be especially challenging. So I might suggest one of the biggest lessons is we start with where we are, what we have, and what we're using instead. And I might look to the things that provincial sort of efforts like BC Campus, the Open Textbook Collection, Campus Ontario's Open Library, Campus Manitoba's collection instead, and try to build on top of these. So if we're thinking about technologies and repositories, let's also look to our neighbors around the world. Let's look at the George Mason Meta Finder, the SUNY Oasis search. I think, Clint, you had a German repository that you mentioned. Orsi and Dominique, you mentioned quite a few as well. Really going in with that mindset of shared infrastructure. And if something is owned and managed by someone else that we trust in this network, what's theirs is ours, what's ours is theirs. You know, and it's very hard to sort of give up that sense of ownership, but really, if we're thinking about education as a human right and something that we collectively own and work and are participating in, I think that can be really important for us to keep that strategy in mind rather than just trying to create our own version of. I also might encourage us to think beyond just tools and platforms. When it comes to OER, let's also think about formats in addition to license. So something we can maybe urge the federal government to do is not only make sure that the research and knowledge that they're putting out is openly licensed, but it's also available in multiple formats. Clint talked about resiliency. So can we ask the government to put out their work in web editable and print formats for our northern community members who might not be able to access these on a day-to-day basis? I think about my work with a group in Louisiana last year where they had a hurricane hit the state, and OER really helped them be a little more resilient to get learners back into online classrooms because physical classrooms just weren't an option at that time. And I will also say, you know, the US government has done a lot of work in what they're calling the Open Textbook Pilot, the Department of Education Open Textbook Pilot. I think that has been a great model for us to look at in terms of investing in provincial initiatives, what they call state initiatives there. I guess Haley can tell us more. Thinking about creation of new OER, but also creation of new platforms like LibreText, and creating with the sense of sustainability in mind. So investing not only in tools to create OER, but also the people and the pedagogy that does this work. I was chatting with Mary earlier this morning, and she talked about the human labor that goes into producing and implementing OER. So I think even though we're having a conversation about infrastructure today, let's not keep in mind the people who are being trained to use these tools or using these tools on the regular and what we need to invest in to again, make sure that people can continue to do this work over time.
Actually, to both of you, you mentioned different models, and you were mentioning as well that we might that could be. So I guess I'll just link that with the previous conversation. As much as if you consider everything that we share, what is mine is yours. When you deal with different cultures, then you realize that sometimes they cannot share. Or I'm pushing some of my PhD and master students to actually publish my thesis as open access and actually think about how they would be teaching what they are researching and then develop who we are. And they say, I can only do this in Canada. I wouldn't be able to do it in my original country because of censorship or retaliation. So we have to think as well that when we open those repository, and I'm trying to do that with the True Project, and I'm dealing with francophonie, so certain countries like Africa, and then you are training them to develop who we are. And then at some point they say, but I cannot actually go all the way from where I live. So we have to think about this. What is our role to support? Is it to have safe open infrastructure where they are protected? So should we have, open repository which are open to the public, but at the same time, sometimes some private space within those structures so that we want to support and to get that force, courage to actually go all the way because they feel they are supported and they can trust. They may actually go all the way. But I think that before we get there, our repository is safe. And I think we can think about the truth and reconciliation when we develop who we are as well as possible. Because as I said, they are looking for truth, but we're trying as well to reconcile our practices and way of being. And how can those open infrastructure represent this, or even the policies that we are making? Because a policy in Canada may actually jeopardize the future of someone in another country. And therefore, you do have to think about that as well. And I think that Canada could play an incredible role in figuring out, because of the truth and reconciliation, slowly opening our repositories. Because we can make something discoverable and make something shareable. We may have a community, but the user cannot do it. We have to start thinking as one of a group of users that would love to join us, but they can't.
Thank you, and thank you for bridging the questions as well. Some of the comments just now is also reminding me of a few lessons. I remember early days of the open textbook movement, and I can't remember which project this was from, but a good example. The Introduction to Astronomy open textbook was published, right? And there was a sense of, all right, we've solved this problem. Let's move on to the next subject area. And of course, a few critical conversations later, colleagues from hemisphere say, sky looks a little bit different from down here. So, there's that, again, the harm we can do with the best of intentions. But part of this is also, I think, the kind of people and the technologies. When we build systems, of course, the labor, I want to come back to Mary's point as well. I do think, to the extent that we continue to rely on uncompensated labor, invisible labor, or at least severely undercompensated labor at the very least, by design, in a way, we are restricting the publishing and creation of who we are to those who have significant privilege. Those might be positions that are tenured faculty positions, for example. And the epistemologies that then get overrepresented, privilege that gets embedded within the text, is also part of, I think, what we need to think about in terms of democratizing the process of knowledge creation, not just in a way that is, cosmetically nice. We've done a good job. Difficult questions. So maybe I'll round off by just asking this open question. Whoever would like to begin, but what is your dream scenario?
Free and open access to all the information of the world for anybody who wants it. That's really what it is. It's like, you know, I was saying earlier that, you know, I'm of the generation that remembers, like, before the internet, as the internet happened, and now living with the internet, and how difficult it was to access information pre-internet age, and the internet came along to make this possible. This technology came along to make it possible to open up not only access to information, but the creation of information projects like Wikipedia, for example. So it's not only the access to information for anybody who wants, but also the ability to create knowledge for anybody who wants. I think that's the ultimate goal.
I'll add on to that. I think thinking of OER and open pedagogy as the default for K-12 and higher ed, having all of this funded by the government because we see knowledge as a public good and education as a human right. Infrastructure-wise, shared repositories, collaborative networks, interoperable tools that are built on privacy protection and not data mining, as you were describing, Lynn. Investment in people, so they're compensated for their labor. And really a world where education becomes a means and is really the central agent for us to have a thriving democracy, because that's really what it's about for me.
I'm going to start with the open community garden metaphor. And this would be my dream in terms of being able to cultivate the new generation, to support the new generation, but relying as well on the competencies and expertise and wisdom of everybody involved. And I'm thinking elders. I was actually part of the UFT of the digital humanities in the 90s. And we can say that we have actually 1990 and we are 2022. We are in there. There's no more questioning about the digital humanities. And we were just pinging and things like that. So I'm not afraid that the technology will be there. I think it's more, again, that sense of collaboration and belonging and supporting the garden, because open education is an incredible garden. And if we can use this to face as well what we don't know, because there's lots that we don't know, I think that working together and cultivating the new way of information, transforming information into knowledge and training requires the expertise of different groups, the elders and the young. Sometimes adopt technology faster, but haven't felt and experienced what the elders have done. So I think it takes intergeneration and really, again, the support and trust of who we actually are inspired by. And if that can be the dream to the young generation, they are amazing, but they have lots of fears as well. And I have young children, and they have lots of fears. So I think we need to really tell them that they'll be okay, even if we don't know. And I think that open education and open technology and open science can really be a way of reassuring them, because they'll be part of it. We are integrating them in this.
Maybe we'll round off just by saying, you know, I think it would be point a specific things to say. The TV's NTC program, I mean, that should be the default, right? I think we're in a situation where the same kind of questioning and interrogation that people do when it comes to open pedagogical practices like how or OER for that matter, a higher threshold that people erect for something that's new. Those are the higher thresholds we should be erecting when it comes to
you explain
why we should be charging students to do their homework, not explain why open education is a useful thing. A lot of it is changing the rules of the game over here. And so it reminds me in some ways of, when I'm in some meetings, I've been in meetings, not a surprise, I know, where somebody will trot out and give the group the business case for why diversity is important. It does this, it does that. And I want to throw up in the back of my mouth. I understand that there's a business case, but that's not why we should be doing this work, right? So in some ways, it's part of it is for me, there's a lot of change that has to happen, of course. And a lot of it is about ensuring that the environment that educators are working in allows them to feel supported enough so that they are not pitting themselves against their students. It's not convenience that is being weaponized by commercial publishers to try and draw educators in the direction of solutions that extract students' data, that cost students money, and perpetuate inequities. But it's that sense of convenience that comes from faculty being in the situation they are and not feeling supported and not feeling understood. So a sense of belonging for students, a sense of feeling valued and supported by faculty, and in some cases, not even just having a seat at the table, but just building a new table. There's a lot that, of course, we need to do. So I do want to recognize we wanted to have a bit of an open session as well, but we are now almost 15 minutes over time into Anne and Michael's session. So what I'm hoping is that we can take the energy of this conversation, take these ideas, and continue in a way at the smaller tables in the following plenaries to come. But please join me in thanking our fabulous